My name is Kaylin Miles. I am 34 years old. 2 weeks ago, my husband of 6 years stood on a stage at his own company, Gala, tapped the microphone, and turned me into a punchline. He held up his champagne glass, smiled at 400 of the wealthiest people in Scottsdale, Arizona, and pointed straight at my table. "Let's start the bidding at $1, he said, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "Who wants to take home this useless wife?" Laughter rolled through the ballroom. It was the kind of polite, rehearsed laughter people offer when the man holding the microphone also holds their paychecks. 400 pairs of eyes shifted to me. I stood there near the centerpieces in an understated navy gown, my fingers tracing the frayed strap of a thrifted clutch. I did not cry. I did not run out the side doors. I only looked at him. Then a man sitting near the back bar pushed his chair out. He stood up, adjusted his suit jacket, and spoke 4 words that stripped the air from the room. "I will pay $5 million. Before I tell you who that stranger was and how those 4 words dismantled my husband's real estate empire in a matter of days, please take a second to hit like and subscribe to QT Told Stories. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are watching from tonight. Now let me take you back to that ballroom, to the exact moment my marriage became a transaction. To understand the weight of that night, you need to see the room. The luxury resort ballroom was dripping in new money. Trent Sterling, my husband, was the CEO of Vanguard Development. He had built his firm on the back of relentless acquisitions and a charismatic smile. I had given up my career as a historical document archivist years ago to manage his early administrative chaos. I built his filing systems. I organized his initial contracts. But as his wealth grew, my role shrank. By year 6, I was nothing more than a prop he trotted out for optics. When Trent made his $1 joke, the executives' wives at my table gave me quick, pitying glances before looking down at their plates. Trent thrived on that dynamic. He loved reminding me, and everyone else, that I held no financial weight in his world. He waited for the laughter to peak, his smug grin locked in place, ready to deliver his next line. That was when the stranger spoke. $5 million. The silence that followed was immediate and suffocating. The clinking of silver forks stopped. The string quartet in the corner faltered, a violinist missing a note. Every head in the room turned toward the back. The man was tall, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that made Trent's tuxedo look like a rental. He did not yell. He had the calm, unhurried posture of a man who owned the ground he stood on. He locked eyes with me. He did not glance at Trent. On stage, Trent's grin vanished. His face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks in real time. Trent was a man obsessed with control, and his brain scrambled to process a variable he had not planned for. In his paranoid mind, there was only one explanation. He assumed the stranger was a secret lover, a hidden billionaire stepping out of the shadows to claim me. The man walked slowly down the center aisle. The crowd parted for him. He stopped at table 4, Trent's designated VIP table. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a sleek, embossed business card, and set it down next to Trent's empty water glass. He did not say another word. He turned and walked out the double doors, leaving the card resting on the white tablecloth. Trent dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a sharp feedback screech that made the front row wince. He stepped down, his eyes darting between the exit, the business card, and me. Whispers erupted across the 400 guests, a rising tide of speculation and shock. Trent grabbed the card, his knuckles turning white, and marched straight toward me. The gala was over. The war had just begun. The valet brought the Mercedes around in a tense hush. Trent snatched the keys from the attendant without offering his customary cash tip, leaving the young man standing awkwardly under the resort awning. The heavy doors of the car shut, sealing us inside a quiet cabin that felt more like a vacuum. Trent gripped the leather steering wheel, his knuckles turning a pale, bloodless white. He did not start the engine immediately. He sat there in the dim light of the dashboard, his breathing shallow and rapid. When he finally hit the ignition, the tires let out a sharp squeal against the pavement. The drive back to our Paradise Valley mansion began in suffocating silence. The streetlights flickered across Trent's face, highlighting the tight, furious set of his jaw. He had spent the entire evening projecting the image of an untouchable titan of industry, but the stranger in the charcoal suit had shattered that facade with a single sentence. Now the charismatic public persona was gone. "Who is he?" Trent asked. His voice was low, vibrating with a cold, controlled fury. He kept his eyes locked on the winding desert road. I kept my gaze fixed on the passing saguaro cacti, their dark silhouettes looming against the night sky. "I do not know him, Trent. Do not lie to me in this car, Kaylin." He gripped the wheel harder. "You expect me to believe a phantom billionaire strolls into my gala, bypasses the silent auction, and bids $5 million on a woman he has never met? How long has this been going on? Did you meet him at the country club? Is he one of the private equity guys from the Phoenix Summit?" I turned my head slightly to look at my husband. As he shifted his neck to check the rearview mirror, the street lamp illuminated his collar. There, pressed into the crisp white fabric of his tuxedo shirt, was a distinct smudge. It was a vivid shade of coral pink. I recognized that color instantly. It was a custom cosmetic blend imported from a boutique in Milan, worn exclusively by Harper Quinn. Harper was Vanguard Development's glamorous vice president of acquisitions. She was the woman Trent claimed he spent countless late nights with, supposedly reviewing zoning permits and pitch decks. Looking at the stain on his collar, I documented the physical evidence, mentally filing it away with the precision of a seasoned archivist. I did not point out the lipstick. I did not raise my voice. I simply let his accusation hang in the stagnant air of the car. My silence infuriated him more than any denial ever could. He pressed the accelerator down, pushing the heavy sedan far past the speed limit until we reached the towering wrought iron gates of our estate. The gates parted, and we pulled onto the circular driveway. Our house was a sprawling modern monument of glass and concrete, built to showcase a level of wealth Trent desperately wanted the world to believe he possessed. He threw the car into park, stepped out, and marched to the front door without waiting for me. I followed him inside, the heels of my shoes clicking against the imported Italian tile of the foyer. Trent walked straight to the custom wet bar in his study. He poured a heavy measure of scotch into a crystal tumbler. The ice clinked sharply against the glass. He drank half of it in a single swallow, set the glass down, and finally turned to face me. His eyes scanned my face, searching for a trace of guilt or fear. When he found neither, his expression shifted. The frantic jealousy of a betrayed husband melted away, replaced by the calculating, opportunistic stare of a desperate businessman. "Vanguard is over-leveraged," Trent said. The admission hung in the room heavy and toxic. "The interest rates are strangling the new commercial builds. My board is asking questions I cannot answer. I need liquidity, Kaylin. I need cash, and I need it by the end of the quarter." He picked up the sleek, embossed business card the stranger had left on table 4. He rolled it between his thumb and index finger, staring at the gold foil lettering. "This man, whoever he is, just humiliated me in front of my investors," Trent continued. "But he also made a public bid. In my world, you honor the verbal contract. You are going to call the number on this card tomorrow morning. You are going to set up a private meeting. You will tell him that the $5 million was an opening offer, and we expect it wired into the Vanguard holding account as a silent investment." I stared at him. He was no longer trying to uncover an affair. He was trying to monetize it. "You want me to extort a stranger to cover your corporate debt." "I want you to be useful," Trent snapped. "You owe me this. I gave you this house. I gave you this lifestyle. You are going to secure that capital, Kaylin. Because if you refuse, I will freeze you out. I will cancel the platinum cards. I will take the keys to your car. I will lock you out of the joint accounts before the banks open on Monday. You have no income. You have no credit score that is not tied directly to my name. You walk away from this, and you walk away with nothing." His threat was clinically precise, relying on a financial dependency he had engineered from the very beginning. 7 years ago, I was not a society wife. I was a professional historical document archivist working for the state. I spent my days preserving territorial land deeds, tracing ownership records, back through decades of dust and ink. I had a state pension, a modest apartment, and autonomy. When Vanguard Development was just a rented office suite and a stack of ambitious blueprints, Trent begged me to leave my career. He needed someone he could trust to manage his chaotic administrative framework. I built the filing infrastructure that his empire still relies on today. I cataloged his initial investors, balanced his early escrow accounts, and archived his success. But as the millions started rolling in, he hired a ruthless corporate team and suggested I step back to focus on hosting his clients. Slowly, my salary was absorbed into a joint trust I could not control without his signature. My independence was systematically filed away into the background until I became just another line item on his tax return. He believed I was entirely dependent on paper. He was right about the paper. He was wrong about my dependency. "I will think about it," I said. My voice was steady, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through my veins. "Do not think," Dial Trent ordered. He tossed the business card onto the mahogany desk. I picked up the card, turned on my heel, and walked out of the study. I climbed the floating glass staircase to the second floor and walked straight into the master bathroom. I shut the heavy oak door. The lock engaged with a solid, metallic click. I walked over to the sprawling walk-in shower and turned the faucet all the way up, letting the scalding water hit the glass tiles. The steady rush of the water would drown out any noise. I did not collapse against the door. I knelt on the cold marble floor and reached under the custom dual vanity. My fingers traced the smooth wood until I found the loose section of the baseboard. I pressed the hidden latch, pulled the panel away, and retrieved a small, waterproof, leather-bound notebook. The archivist had never stopped archiving. I flipped through the pages. The notebook was filled with dates, times routing numbers, and offshore account balances I had quietly tracked by monitoring Trent's home server late at night. I knew exactly how deep his corporate rot went. I knew about the embezzled funds. I knew about the quiet luxury purchases for Harper Quinn. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I looked at the gold foil lettering on the business card. Elias Thorne, Thorne Capital Management. I punched the 10 digits into my keypad. The line rang twice before the connection clicked open. There was no automated greeting. There was no secretary asking me to hold. Elias, the deep, unhurried voice, answered. I did not introduce myself. I did not ask him why he had placed a $5 million price tag on my head in a room full of my peers. I stared at my reflection in the fogged mirror, tightening my grip on my hidden ledger. "Did you find the deed?" I asked. "I have the original document sitting right here on my desk," Kalen Elias replied. "The water rights are yours." I ended the call. The screen of my phone went dark, but my reflection in the vanity mirror remained sharp and focused. Elias Thorne had the deed securely in his possession. He held the original, unredacted paper. It was the single document Trent did not know existed in its raw form. I took a slow, steadying breath, letting the residual steam from the shower fill the confined space of the bathroom. Years ago, long before Vanguard Development was a recognized corporate entity, my grandfather left me 40 acres of land in Sedona. To the untrained, arrogant eye, it was a desolate stretch of baked red clay and brittle scrub brush. Trent had driven out there with me exactly once during our engagement. He stepped out of his air-conditioned sports car just long enough to scoff at the dry earth. He called the property a worthless sandbox. He advised me to sell the parcel to the county for a quick tax write-off. I declined his financial advice. I kept the property taxes current, quietly transferring the deed into a separate blind trust that my husband could not legally access. My grandfather was a man who understood the unforgiving nature of the desert. He wore boots scuffed pale by the alkali dust and possessed hands made callous from striking dry soil. I remember sitting beside him on the wooden porch of his old cabin, watching the heat waves distort the horizon line. He handed me a glass of tap water, the condensation dripping cool against my wrist. In this state, he told me, men will scheme for silver and bleed for gold, But water is the only currency that sustains true power. Control the well, and you own the town. I remembered that specific lesson when Trent proudly announced Vanguard's crowning achievement 6 months ago. He planned to build a sprawling, elite golf resort right on the edge of the Sedona city limits. His vision included 18 holes of emerald green grass dropped directly into the middle of the arid landscape. To sustain that kind of artificial luxury oasis, Trent needed astronomical volumes of water. His geological engineers had identified a deep subterranean aquifer beneath the red rocks. What Trent did not know, and what his careless, high-priced legal team failed to uncover, was the precise origin of the territorial water rights for that exact basin. As a former historical document archivist, I knew exactly where to look. I bypassed the digitized county records, which were often incomplete, and drove down to the State Historical Archives in the basement of the Capitol Annex. I spent 3 days sifting through fragile bound ledgers until I found the original territorial patents signed decades before the city incorporated. My grandfather's worthless sandbox held the senior grandfathered water rights to the entire aquifer. Trent's luxury golf resort could not pump a single gallon of water without my explicit, notarized signature. That is where Elias Thorne entered the equation. Elias was not a romantic interest. He was not a phantom lover swooping in to rescue a neglected wife from a bad marriage. He was the managing director of a well-funded ecological trust dedicated to halting destructive corporate developments across the Southwest. His organization had been quietly battling Vanguard's reckless expansion for 2 years. Elias had tracked the water rights back to my maiden name using his own investigative resources. We had been in secret communication for weeks, planning our counteroffensive. When Elias stood up in that ballroom and said he would pay $5 million, Trent's fragile ego assumed it was a literal bid for a woman. Trent's arrogance made him blind to the board he was actually playing on. $5 million was the exact calculated valuation of the initial water lease Elias's trust was prepared to offer me. The stranger had walked into my husband's gala, looked him in the eye, and publicly announced the exact price of the bullet that would kill Vanguard Development. I turned off the shower faucet. The sudden quiet in the bathroom was striking. I dried off, wrapped myself in a heavy cotton robe, and secured the hidden baseboard panel beneath the vanity. I walked out of the master suite and descended the floating glass staircase. Trent was gone. His scotch tumbler sat empty on the study desk, a ring of condensation staining the dark wood. The house felt cavernous, filled only with the low hum of the central air conditioning unit. The front gate buzzer chimed, shattering the silence. I glanced at the security monitor mounted on the hallway wall. A silver Lexus was idling in the circular driveway. The driver's side door opened, and Beatrice Sterling stepped out into the night air. Trent's mother was a permanent fixture of Arizona high society. She wore a tailored beige suit, her platinum hair sprayed into an immovable helmet of perfection. Beatrice viewed genuine emotions as a character flaw, and public scandal as a terminal disease. She had never liked me. She preferred women who came with inherited trust funds and malleable spines. I pressed the security release button, unlocking the heavy mahogany front door. Beatrice walked in without bothering to knock. She did not take off her designer sunglasses until she was standing in the dead center of the foyer. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my damp hair and casual robe. "You look exhausted, Kaylin," she said. Her tone was smooth, carrying the manufactured concern of a predator checking the pulse of its prey. "It has been a long evening, Beatrice." She walked past me into the kitchen, her heels clicking against the imported marble in a rhythmic, authoritative tempo. She stopped at the edge of the kitchen island and opened her leather handbag. She reached inside and pulled out a glossy trifold brochure. She set the heavy paper on the granite counter and slid it across the surface toward me. I looked down. The cover featured a serene image of a woman meditating near a mountain lake. The embossed text read, "Serenity Pines Wellness Center, a private psychiatric and residential retreat." "Trent called me on his way to the corporate office," Beatrice said, folding her hands neatly in front of her waist. "He is deeply concerned about your mental state. We all are. Your behavior at the gala tonight was erratic. Standing there drawing that kind of negative attention, interacting with a disruptive stranger, It is not normal. I stared at the brochure. The strategy became instantly clear. Trent was not just trying to extort the $5 million to cover his debt. He was actively setting the stage for a parallel narrative. If I refused to hand over the money, or if the stranger proved uncooperative, Trent needed a reliable scapegoat to explain the public humiliation to his panicked investors. A wife suffering from a sudden, severe psychological breakdown was the perfect cover story. It painted Trent as a tragic, supportive husband dealing with a crisis at home, rather than a cruel fool who auctioned off his spouse for $1. The facility is highly discreet. Beatrice continued, her voice lowering into a conspiratorial whisper. They cater exclusively to prominent families. You would check in voluntarily for 1 month, rest, recover. We will handle the press on our end. We will release a brief statement citing exhaustion. It saves Trent's public image, and it saves you from the embarrassment of a messy public divorce proceeding. And if I decline this generous vacation, I asked, keeping my voice entirely devoid of inflection. Beatrice dropped the mask of the concerned mother-in-law. Her eyes turned hard, reflecting the recessed lighting of the kitchen ceiling. If you decline, Trent will file for an involuntary psychiatric hold. He has the corporate lawyers ready. He has a private physician on retainer who will sign the observation order tonight. You will be removed from this house, Kaylin. Do not force us to make this ugly. Take the brochure, pack a bag. The driver will be here at dawn. She expected tears. She expected me to crumble, to argue, or to scream in defense of my sanity. Instead, I reached out and picked up the glossy paper. I folded it neatly in half and slipped it into the deep pocket of my robe. Thank you for the recommendation, Beatrice, I said. I will be sure to keep it on file. I smiled. It was an icy, precise expression that did not reach my eyes. Beatrice faltered, her pristine posture stiffening as a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed her rigid face. She turned and walked out the door, entirely unaware that the empire she was trying to protect had already begun to burn. The text message arrived on my phone at exactly 10 in the morning. Let us fix this. Apology lunch at my office, noon. Trent never apologized unless he had an audience to witness his grace or a hidden angle to exploit. I knew the invitation was a trap, but in any war you must survey the battlefield before you strike. I dressed in a sharp charcoal suit I had purchased years ago, applying a coat of clear gloss to my lips. I drove my sedan to the downtown Phoenix skyscraper that housed Vanguard Development. Walking into the corporate lobby felt like stepping into a sterile, climate-controlled vault. The walls were clad in imported gray slate. The floors were polished concrete. 7 years ago, Vanguard was a rented 2-room suite above a dry cleaner. I had spent countless nights sitting on a folding chair in that cramped office, using my state archivist training to build Trent's initial vendor database and catalog his early contracts. I organized the foundation he now stood upon. Today, he occupied the top 3 penthouses of a high-rise, and the security guards required me to sign a visitor log to access my own husband's floor. The receptionist offered a tight, nervous smile as I stepped off the private elevator. She did not offer me water. She pointed toward the executive wing, avoiding my eyes. I bypassed Trent's corner office and walked directly into the primary glass-walled conference room. There was no catered lunch. There were no apology flowers. The long mahogany table was bare, save for a thick stack of legal documents resting in the center. Trent sat at the head of the table wearing a tailored navy suit, looking rested and unbothered. To his right sat a man I recognized as a senior partner from a ruthless local corporate law firm. To his left sat Harper Quinn. Harper leaned back in a plush leather executive chair. She wore a pristine white silk blouse and an expression of profound boredom. In her hands, she held a hand-thrown ceramic coffee mug. It was my mug. I had purchased it from a local artisan during a weekend trip to the Red Rocks, the very same trip where Trent had mocked my inherited land. Harper took a slow, deliberate sip. When she lowered the ceramic rim, a distinct crescent of coral pink lipstick remained stamped against the clay. She set the mug down on the polished mahogany, ensuring the lipstick stain faced me directly. It was a silent, territorial marker. She was drinking from my cup in my husband's boardroom, asserting her dominance without speaking a single word. I did not glare at Harper. I did not acknowledge the theft of the mug. I pulled out a chair opposite the lawyer and sat down, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "Where is the lunch, Trent?" I asked. My voice was even, betraying none of the adrenaline humming beneath my skin. Trent offered a patronizing sigh, steepling his fingers under his chin. "We need to be practical, Kaylin. The fallout from the gala last night is spreading. My investors are making phone calls. My mother is highly distressed by your erratic behavior. We need to shield Vanguard from any negative press, and we need to shield you from public scrutiny." The corporate attorney slid the thick stack of paper across the table toward me. He handed me a silver pen. "This is a postnuptial agreement," Trent explained, his tone shifting into the smooth, persuasive cadence he used to close real estate deals. "It legally separates our individual liabilities. If the press attempts to frame your episode last night as a sign of marital instability, this document proves we have a unified, structured financial understanding. It protects your assets. It protects my company. It is just a formality to calm the board down." "Sign it," Trent instructed. "We can move past this entire unpleasant situation." I looked at the silver pen. I looked at the pristine title page of the contract. The average person reads a legal document by skimming the bold headings and trusting the summary. An archivist reads a document by ignoring the headings entirely and hunting for the anomalies. I did not pick up the pen. I placed my index finger on the top corner of the first page and began to turn. The room went silent. The only sound was the crisp rustle of high-grade paper turning under my fingertips. Trent shifted in his chair. Harper checked her watch, rolling her eyes. I ignored them. I scanned the indemnification clauses, the non-disclosure agreements, and the standard liability waivers. They were standard boilerplate text. I kept turning. On page 14, buried deep within a section labeled Miscellaneous Asset Consolidation, I found the poison. The paragraph was dense, written in convoluted legalese designed to fatigue the reader. But the core directive was undeniable. By signing the agreement, I would be legally transferring all separate property held in my name prior to the marriage into the Vanguard Holdings corporate trust. The document specifically cited any unentitled parcels located within Coconino and Yavapai counties. It was a direct, targeted, legal theft of my Sedona water rights. Trent had realized the precarious nature of his golf resort project. He knew he needed my land, and he thought he could trick me into signing it away under the guise of public relations protection. I closed the folder. I pushed the document back across the mahogany table. It slid until it bumped against the base of my stolen coffee mug. "Section 4, paragraph 9, I said, looking directly at the attorney. "The consolidation clause. You drafted a very elegant trap, counselor, but I am not signing over my grandfather's acreage to Vanguard." The attorney cleared his throat, his eyes darting toward Trent. Trent's charismatic mask shattered instantly. The smooth, persuasive CEO vanished, replaced by the cornered, desperate man I had ridden home with the night before. He slammed his hand flat against the table. The coffee mug rattled. "You are going to sign that contract today," Trent demanded, his voice rising in volume. "I am not signing anything, Trent." Harper let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You really do not understand your position here, do you, Kaylin? You are holding up a multi-million-dollar development over a patch of dirt. You are embarrassing him. Just sign the paper and take your allowance." I turned my gaze to Harper. The coldness in my chest radiated outward. "Keep the mug, Harper," I said. "You always did prefer my leftovers." Harper's smirk vanished. A flush of angry red crept up her neck. Trent stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his smartphone. He tapped the screen with sharp, furious motions. "I offered you an easy exit," Trent said, his eyes locked on his phone. "I told you last night what would happen if you refused to cooperate." He pressed a final button and set the phone face down on the table. 5 seconds later, my own phone vibrated inside my purse. I opened my clutch and retrieved the device. The screen was flooded with automated alerts from our primary bank. Joint checking account suspended. Platinum credit line frozen. Savings transfer denied. Please contact your branch manager. Trent walked slowly around the table, stopping just a few feet from my chair. He looked down at me, savoring his perceived victory. The financial execution was complete. You have zero liquid capital, Trent whispered, ensuring the lawyer and Harper heard every word. Your cards will decline at the gas station. You cannot buy a cup of coffee. You cannot afford to hire a lawyer to fight this postnup. You have no money, you have no power, and by the time I call the property manager at the house, your entry code will be disabled. You have nowhere to go. Sign the document, Kaylin. Beg for your allowance. He pointed to the silver pen resting on the contract. I looked at the pen. I looked at the digital fraud alerts glowing on my phone screen. Trent expected me to panic. He expected the sudden, terrifying weight of poverty to crush my resistance. He believed that cutting off my access to his wealth would render me helpless. He forgot that I survived for years on a state clerk's salary long before I ever met him. I stood up, I smoothed the wrinkles from my charcoal skirt, I picked up my purse and slipped the phone inside. Do not call the property manager, I said calmly. I already packed my bags this morning. I did not wait for his response. I turned and walked out of the glass-walled conference room. I did not look back at Harper. I did not look back at the lawyer. I walked down the long, silent corridor of the executive suite, my heels maintaining a steady, unhurried rhythm against the polished concrete. The receptionist stared at me as I passed her desk, sensing the seismic shift in the atmosphere. I pressed the call button for the elevator. The metal doors slid open. I stepped inside the empty cab and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors sealed shut, severing me from Vanguard Development, my phone buzzed a final time in the quiet descent. I opened the new message. It was from an unknown number, but I knew exactly who sent it. Check your new private routing number, the text read. $500,000 advance wired. The chessboard is set. We begin today. Elias. The drive from the Vanguard Development headquarters to the Oakmont Reserve took 20 minutes. The reserve was a discreet, generational country club tucked against the base of Camelback Mountain. Trent had spent 4 years sitting on their waiting list, quietly desperate for an invitation that never arrived. The membership committee preferred old money that whispered over new money that shouted. Walking through the heavy, carved wooden doors, I felt the distinct drop in temperature. The air smelled of aged cedar and citrus. The hostess guided me to a secluded patio table shaded by a sprawling bougainvillea. A waiter in a crisp white jacket approached immediately, placing a silver water pitcher on the table. "May I bring you something to start, madam?" he asked. "Just black coffee, please," I replied. When he returned with a porcelain cup and a silver check tray, I did not reach for my clutch to find a useless frozen piece of plastic. Earlier that morning, before Trent's tantrum in the boardroom, I had retrieved a sealed envelope from a hollowed-out book in my personal library. I opened my purse and pulled out a crisp, uncreased $100 bill. I laid the paper currency on the silver tray. "Keep the change," I told the waiter. The tactile sensation of the paper money grounding me was profound. Trent believed he had severed my lifeline by freezing the joint accounts, rendering me an indentured servant to his checking account. Paying for my own coffee with untraceable cash was a quiet, private victory. It proved I was not broken. It proved the archivist had always maintained a backup file. A shadow fell across the white linen tablecloth. Elias Thorne pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down. He wore a dark navy suit without a tie, projecting an aura of effortless authority. He did not possess the frantic performative energy that dictated Trent's every movement. "You received the wire transfer," Elias said. It was a statement, not an inquiry. "I did," I said, taking a sip of the dark coffee. $500,000 is a substantial retainer for a woman you met less than 24 hours ago. Why are you funding my exit strategy, Elias? Elias reached inside his tailored jacket and withdrew a slender manila folder. He placed it squarely between us. I am not funding your exit strategy, Kaylin. I am funding our mutual acquisition. Vanguard Development is bleeding out. Your husband has overleveraged his commercial properties to sustain the illusion of exponential growth. He opened the folder. Inside rested a stack of high-resolution satellite photographs and a sheaf of municipal documents stamped with county seals. Look at the first photograph, Elias instructed. I pulled the glossy image toward me. It showed a vast, arid expanse of red clay and sagebrush. It was my grandfather's land in Sedona, but the pristine desert was scarred. Heavy excavation machinery was visible in the lower quadrant. Deep trenches had been carved into the ancient soil. Trent has already begun preliminary grading, Elias said, his tone flat and clinical. He could not wait for the post-nuptial agreement to trap you. The interest rates on his primary construction loans are adjusting next month. He needs the golf resort project to show physical progress to secure his next round of investor capital. He moved bulldozers onto your property 3 days ago. I stared at the trenches defacing my inheritance. He cannot break ground without submitting the environmental impact surveys and the geological water rights. The city planners required the deed holder's authorized signature on the preliminary permits. Elias slid a secondary piece of paper across the linen cloth. It was a photocopy of a Yavapai County land use permit. He bypassed the requirement. I examined the bottom of the form. There, resting on the authorization line, was my signature, Kaylin Miles Sterling. To a casual observer, the cursive loops appeared accurate, but I spent my entire professional career authenticating historical penmanship. I knew the exact pressure points of a genuine signature. The lower loop of the Y was too rigid. The tail of the S dragged in a way mine never did. It was Trent's handwriting disguised as mine. He forged my name, I said. The realization did not bring tears. It brought a cold, clarifying focus. He committed federal wire fraud by submitting those forged documents electronically across county lines, Elias corrected. And that brings us to the Gala. You asked why I bid $5 million for you? Elias leaned back in his chair, watching my reaction carefully. 2 years ago, Trent realized traditional banks would no longer underwrite his reckless expansion. He turned to private shadow lending firms to secure bridge capital. My EcoTrust operates a subsidiary financial wing designed specifically to buy up distressed debt from reckless developers. Trent owes you money, I concluded, the pieces snapping together. Trent borrowed exactly $5 million from my firm to cover a margin call, Elias stated. He is currently 90 days in default. When I stood up in that ballroom, I was not participating in his misogynistic joke. I was delivering a public receipt. The number was a calculated insult. I wanted him to look into the crowd and see the exact price of his own ruin. I looked away from the forged permit and met Elias's steady gaze. The landscape of my marriage had shifted from a domestic prison into a high-stakes corporate battleground. I have the debt, Elias said, leaning forward and lowering his voice. You have the senior water rights. Without the aquifer, his golf resort is a dry crater. Without the resort, he defaults on his primary investor obligations within the month. We can dismantle his fraudulent empire brick by brick, entirely within the bounds of the law. I traced the rim of my porcelain coffee cup. What are your terms? A formal partnership, Elias replied. You hold your ground on the water rights. You do not sign any settlement agreements he places in front of you. In exchange, my legal team will shield you from his divorce tactics, and my trust will purchase the Sedona Aquifer from you at its true market value once Vanguard is liquidated. It was a flawless, lethal strategy. Trent had spent years treating me like a depreciating asset, unaware that I held the keys to his destruction. I agree to the terms, I said. Elias did not smile. His expression remained serious, carrying the weight of a seasoned strategist. You need to understand the danger of this position, Kaylin. Men like Trent Sterling build their entire identities on the illusion of control. When you strip that away, they do not surrender gracefully. Cornered animals are unpredictable. He has lost his financial leverage, which means he will pivot to reputational warfare. He will try to destroy your character. He already auctioned me off for $1, I countered calmly. My reputation is not his to control anymore. I reached across the table, extending my hand. Elias met my grip. His handshake was firm, professional, and devoid of the performative dominance Trent always employed. We were sealing a pact that would end Vanguard development forever. As our hands clasped, a sudden movement caught my peripheral vision. Near the arched entryway of the patio dining room stood Harper Quinn. She was dressed in a sleek ivory sheath dress holding a leather portfolio. She must have been arriving for a discreet networking lunch with a rival developer. She froze when she saw me. Her eyes darted from my face to Elias and then down to our joined hands. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face. Harper did not hesitate. She dropped her portfolio onto a nearby chair, reached into her designer handbag, and retrieved her smartphone. She raised the device, aiming the lens directly at our table. The subtle digital click of the camera shutter was barely audible over the rustle of the bougainvillea leaves, but the intent was deafening. She had captured an image of Trent's estranged wife sitting in an exclusive elite country club, shaking hands with the mysterious billionaire who had humiliated her husband the night before. To anyone lacking the context of our corporate alliance, the photograph told a very different, highly scandalous story. Harper lowered her phone, her smile widening into something venomous. She did not approach the table to gloat. She did not say a word. She simply turned on her designer heel and sprinted back through the heavy wooden doors, eager to deliver her prize. I knew exactly where she was going. She was heading straight to the local elite circles, ready to weave a narrative of my infidelity and paint Trent as the tragic, betrayed victim. Elias followed my line of sight, noticing the empty space where Harper had just been standing. He looked back at me, his jaw tightening slightly. "The reputational warfare begins today," Elias noted quietly. I picked up my coffee cup, taking a final, deliberate sip. "Let her spin her story," I said. "A photograph can ruin a reputation, but a forged permit ruins a life." The speed of high society gossip in Scottsdale rivals the spread of a dry brush fire. Harper Quinn did not waste a single second. By the time I finished my dark coffee with Elias Thorne and walked out of the Oakmont Reserve, the photograph was already circulating through the exclusive digital networks of Paradise Valley. Trent weaponized the image instantly. He utilized his public relations team to spin a quiet, devastating narrative of a loyal, hard-working CEO who had been blindsided by a scheming, unfaithful wife. The social execution was swift, precise, and entirely silent. I received an email notification before I even reached my car. It was a formal message from the Paradise Valley Children's Hospital Gala Committee, an elite philanthropic board I had co-chaired for 3 consecutive years. The message politely informed me that my services were no longer required, citing a sudden shift in organizational direction. Less than an hour later, my digital membership portal for the Camelback Mountain Club displayed a bright red suspension banner. Trent wanted to isolate me. He believed that cutting off my social oxygen and erasing my status would force me to suffocate in the desert heat. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat as I steered my sedan onto the interstate. The caller identification displayed Beatrice Sterling. I did not answer. I let the call roll to the automated system and connected the resulting audio file to my dashboard speakers. Beatrice's voice filled the cabin of the car, dripping with manufactured sorrow. She paused at all the strategic moments, ensuring her heavy theatrical sighs were captured by the microphone. "Kaylin," she said, her tone thick with practiced grief. "Trent just showed me the photograph from the country club. I am devastated. After everything my son has provided for you, after the beautiful life we welcomed you into, this shameless betrayal is just heartbreaking. Please do not contact us again." She was performing for an audience of 1, ensuring there was an auditory record of her victimhood in case the divorce proceedings required character witnesses. I did not delete the message. I tapped my dashboard screen, forwarding the audio file directly to a secure, encrypted cloud drive the tech team at Elias's trust had provisioned for me. Evidence of their coordinated smear campaign would be highly useful when the true narrative required an anchor. I exited the highway and navigated the familiar winding roads toward the Paradise Valley estate. I intended to retrieve a few remaining personal documents from my home office before stepping fully into the void. When I reached the towering wrought iron security gates of the mansion, I pressed the remote transmitter clipped to my sun visor. The heavy metal gates remained motionless. I pulled my car up to the brushed steel security pedestal and entered my private 6-digit access code into the keypad. The small liquid crystal display flashed an invalid entry warning. I typed the numbers a second time. The screen flashed red again. Trent had wiped my credentials from the system. He had changed the physical and digital locks to the estate while I was sitting across from Elias finalizing his punishment. Trent assumed I would panic. He pictured me stranded on the hot asphalt, staring through the iron bars at a life I could no longer touch, possessing nothing but the clothes on my back. He did not know that the trunk of my sedan already held 2 large, heavy suitcases. I had packed my most critical belongings, essential records and heirloom jewelry, long before he even woke up that morning. The archivist never leaves a facility without securing the vital records. I put the car in reverse, backed out of the private drive, and drove away from the mansion without a second glance. I headed south toward a modest leased apartment complex in a quiet Tempe neighborhood. Elias had secured the ground floor unit under an anonymous shell corporation, funding the 6-month lease entirely with his retainer. Walking into the small beige living room felt like drawing my first unobstructed breath in 6 years. There was no imported marble. There were no vaulted ceilings designed to intimidate guests. There was only quiet, highly functional space. I set my bags down on the scuffed laminate floor, sat at the cheap Formica kitchen island, and unzipped the front pocket of my laptop case. Trent believed he had severed my connection to his empire when he froze the bank accounts and changed the physical locks. He suffered from the arrogant delusion that wealth equates to structural intelligence. He forgot who laid the digital bricks of Vanguard development. Years prior, when his firm was still operating out of a cramped rented office suite above a dry cleaner, I had wired his initial local area network. I configured the primary servers. I built the administrative firewalls. When we eventually moved into the Paradise Valley mansion, I integrated his home office network with the corporate mainframe to allow him seamless remote access. During that installation, I had programmed a dormant administrative backdoor into the system for emergency troubleshooting. Trent never bothered to learn how the architecture functioned. He only cared that the green indicator lights blinked on his router. I opened my laptop and connected to the encrypted wireless network Elias had provided. I launched a dark command terminal and typed in a string of legacy credentials. The screen went black for a fraction of a second before flooding with cascading lines of white code. I bypassed the primary security gateway, slipping undetected through the firewall, and dropped silently into Trent's private home server directory. I began pulling the raw data. Gigabytes of financial ledgers, internal memorandums, and hidden spreadsheets flowed across the encrypted connection into my secure hard drive. I opened the primary accounting logs for Vanguard's current fiscal year. Trent was not just over-leveraged. He was orchestrating a desperate, sprawling shell game. I cross-referenced the outgoing expenditures with the registered vendor lists. Trent had created dozens of dummy accounts billing Vanguard development for heavy construction materials, architectural consulting, and geological surveys that never existed. I traced the outgoing wire transfers from these fake vendors. The money did not go to concrete suppliers or engineering firms. The funds funneled directly into a web of offshore holding accounts. I ran a search on the registered agents for those specific offshore entities. The name attached to the routing numbers was Harper Quinn. Trent was actively embezzling millions of dollars from his own investors. He was draining the lifeblood of his company to finance Harper's designer wardrobe luxury European vacations and a high-end condominium leased in her name in downtown Phoenix. The sheer volume of the theft was staggering. He was a corporate parasite feeding on his own host, using my stolen water rights as a mirage to keep his investors looking the other way. As the final encrypted ledger finished downloading to my local drive, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the quiet apartment. I closed the laptop instantly, sliding the silver machine under a stack of empty moving boxes. I walked to the front door and looked through the brass peephole. A man in a faded polo shirt stood on the welcome mat, holding a thick manila envelope. He did not look like a property manager or a delivery driver. I opened the door. The man asked if I was Kaylin Miles. When I confirmed my identity, he shoved the heavy envelope into my hands, muttered a standard legal greeting confirming service, and walked quickly back to his idling car. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and tore open the paper seal. I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on premium bond paper. It was an expedited, at-fault divorce petition. Trent was suing me for the immediate dissolution of our marriage. I read the primary citation listed on the second page, expecting to see allegations of infidelity based on Harper's country club photograph. Instead, I read a different lie. Trent was claiming spousal abandonment. He had intentionally locked me out of my own home, severed my financial access, and then filed a sworn legal affidavit stating that I had deserted the marriage and the marital residence of my own free will. He was racing the clock, attempting to secure a default legal judgment to strip my assets and claim the Sedona land before I could mount a defense or secure independent counsel. I set the divorce papers down on the Formica counter next to my hidden laptop. Trent thought he was playing a brilliant, aggressive, offensive game. He did not realize he had just handed me the exact legal arena I needed to bury him in his own perjury. The shift from a defensive posture to a calculated offensive strike requires a distinct change in environment. I pushed the served divorce papers to the edge of the Formica counter and pulled my laptop to the center of the kitchen island. The modest beige apartment in Tempe was no longer just a sanctuary funded by Elias Thorne. It was a war room. For the next 12 hours, the only illumination in the room came from the harsh blue glow of my computer screen. I approached Trent's stolen server files with the methodical precision of a state archivist indexing a forgotten historical century. When you are confronted with gigabytes of raw, unstructured data, you do not read every line. You look for the anomalies in the ledgers. You search for the dates where the outgoing capital does not match the stated corporate objectives. I opened the folder dedicated to Trent's international travel expenses from 2 years prior. At the time, Trent had informed me he was attending a mandatory week-long real estate summit in Europe. He insisted the event was strictly for executives, explicitly stating that spouses were not invited to the grueling series of roundtable discussions. I had spent that week in Paradise Valley, coordinating the seasonal landscaping for our estate and managing his dry cleaning schedule. When he returned from the trip, he complained about the exhausting flight and handed me a generic silk scarf he had clearly purchased from an airport duty-free kiosk. I opened a digitized receipt logged under a generic vendor code during those exact dates. The invoice was not from a conference center or a corporate hotel. The document originated from a boutique jewelry designer located on the Place Vendôme in Paris. The receipt detailed the purchase of a custom diamond collar necklace. The final charge was $40,000. The shipping address listed on the bottom of the invoice did not point to our Paradise Valley mansion. The diamonds had been securely couriered to a luxury residential high-rise in downtown Phoenix. It was the exact building where Harper Quinn resided. Finding the receipt did not break my heart. It validated my departure. Trent had stolen $40,000 from his own company operating budget to drape diamonds across the neck of his vice president of acquisitions, while handing me airport souvenirs and demanding my gratitude. I saved the digital invoice into a separate secure folder labeled Leverage. I pushed the screen down slightly and picked up the thick stack of divorce papers the courier had shoved into my hands. I bypassed the standard dissolution clauses and flipped directly to the specific demands. Trent had retained Montgomery Pierce. Montgomery was the most notorious family law litigator in Maricopa County. He was a lawyer who specialized in punishing spouses who dared to step out of line, renowned for burying opposing counsel in endless, expensive discovery motions until the opposing party simply ran out of money and surrendered. Trent's legal demands were exorbitant. He was not merely asking for a clean break. The petition demanded punitive damages for my public disruption at the company Gala, citing profound emotional distress and reputational harm. Furthermore, the petition demanded the immediate transfer of the Sedona acreage into his Vanguard Holding Trust. He framed the land transfer as necessary restitution to repair the corporate damage I had allegedly caused by humiliating him in front of his primary investors. Trent intended to use the Arizona family court system to bleed me dry. If I engaged him in a conventional legal battle over the divorce terms, my $500,000 retainer from Elias would evaporate in months. I would be dragged through a grueling, multi-year litigation process, and Trent would use his corporate attorneys to stall every hearing. I realized that defending myself in family court was a losing strategy. I needed a nuclear option that bypassed the domestic arena entirely. I initiated a secure, encrypted video call with Elias Thorne. When his face appeared on my screen, he was sitting in a dimly lit office reviewing his own stack of financial dossiers. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I shared my screen displaying the labyrinth of dummy vendor accounts and offshore routing numbers I had extracted from the Vanguard server. We spent the next 3 hours tracing the digital footprints of the embezzled funds. Trent was pulling capital from his legitimate construction loans, filtering the money through fake invoices for geological surveys and concrete suppliers, and funneling the clean cash into limited liability corporations registered in Delaware. Elias cross-referenced the corporate registration numbers using his proprietary database. The managing director listed on every single shell corporation was Harper Quinn. The scope of their fraud was breathtaking. They were not just having a sophisticated affair. They were running a coordinated financial syndicate, draining millions from unsuspecting private equity investors to fund their lavish shared lifestyle. If we handed this digital trail to the federal authorities, the divorce petition would become irrelevant. Trent and Harper would be fighting federal indictments, not a domestic dispute over alimony. We had the weapon. We just needed to load it. But war is rarely a linear progression. Just as Elias and I finalized the timeline of the embezzlement, my phone chimed with a high-priority alert from the county clerk portal. I had registered my name in the public judicial database the moment Trent froze my bank accounts, anticipating a swift legal maneuver. I opened the notification. A cold, heavy sensation settled in my stomach as I read the attached digital ruling. Trent had not just filed for an expedited divorce. Working in tandem with his corporate legal team, he had filed an emergency ex parte injunction in civil court regarding the Sedona property. I read the judge's temporary order. Trent had submitted the forged municipality permits to the civil judge. His lawyers successfully argued that Vanguard Development had already committed substantial corporate resources and heavy machinery to the land based on my alleged written consent. He convinced the judge that the 40 acres were no longer a separate inherited asset, but a heavily entangled marital corporate asset, vital to the survival of a major local employer. The judge granted the emergency injunction. My Sedona land was officially frozen by court order. I was legally barred from transferring the deed, selling the water rights, or interfering with the property boundaries until the civil dispute was resolved. The trap sprang shut with terrifying efficiency. My primary leverage was locked in a judicial holding pattern. I could not finalize the sale to Elias Thorne. The Eco Trust could not intervene to halt the bulldozers because the civil court had just granted Trent temporary protective status over the grading process. Trent had successfully weaponized the justice system using forged documents, buying himself the exact amount of time he needed to secure his next round of investor funding. Elias watched my face through the video feed, reading the subtle shift in my posture. He asked what had happened. I forwarded him the judge's ruling. Elias remained silent for a long moment, calculating the new odds. The chessboard had just been flipped. My phone illuminated on the kitchen island. A new text message arrived. The sender was Trent. He knew the county clerk system would notify me the moment the injunction hit the public ledger. He could not resist the urge to gloat. I opened the message. "You are playing checkers, sweetheart. I own the board." He wanted me to respond with fury. He wanted a frantic phone call. He wanted the validation of my panic, proof that his legal maneuvering had successfully broken my spirit. He expected the archivist to crumble when the files were seized. I stared at the glowing letters on the glass screen. I did not type out a heated paragraph threatening his destruction. I did not mention the Paris diamonds or the offshore shell companies. I simply tapped the screen, selecting a single yellow thumbs up emoji. I hit send. I placed the phone face down on the Formica counter, turned back to my laptop, and began drafting the blueprint for his total annihilation. The Arizona Biltmore Resort hosts the annual Desert Orchid Philanthropy Luncheon every spring. It is a highly coveted ticket. The guest list is curated by the oldest money in Scottsdale. 2 days after a civil judge froze my inherited land, I walked into the Biltmore Gold Room. Trent assumed his legal maneuver would force me into hiding. He underestimated my refusal to be erased. My presence was facilitated by Elena Vance. Elena was a quiet, observant woman who sat on 3 hospital boards and despised Trent. She had mailed her secondary guest pass to my leased apartment. I wore an emerald green tailored suit. I did not attempt to blend in. I walked through the gilded doors, accepted a flute of mineral water from a passing server, and scanned the room. The social temperature dropped the moment my heels crossed the threshold. Conversations halted. Wives of local politicians and real estate moguls exchanged sharp, calculating glances. They had all seen Harper's photograph from the country club. They had all heard Trent's carefully seeded rumors about my alleged mental instability and infidelity. I found Elena near the center tables. She offered a brief, approving nod. I stood beside her, projecting an aura of total indifference. Harper Quinn occupied table 1. She was surrounded by the exact tier of society women she had spent years trying to infiltrate. She wore a blush pink silk dress that draped perfectly over her figure. She was holding court, gesturing softly as she spoke. A waiter approached her table to offer champagne. Harper raised her hand, her voice carrying across the dining area with practiced projection. "Just a sparkling cider for me today," she requested. She placed her left hand gently over her lower stomach. It was a calculated, maternal pose. She turned her head, seeking me out through the crowd. When her eyes locked onto mine, a small, victorious smile played on her lips. The luncheon proceeded through the salad course. The board president delivered her opening remarks regarding charitable contributions. When the floor opened for prominent donors to share brief updates, Harper stood up. She did not wait for an invitation. She adjusted the microphone near the podium, her blush pink dress catching the warm chandelier light. "I want to thank this incredible community for your support during a very turbulent season," Harper began. Her voice trembled just enough to suggest profound vulnerability. "Many of you know Trent Sterling. You know the incredible vision he has for this city. You also know the difficult, heartbreaking transition he has been forced to navigate at home." The room went dead silent. Over 200 women leaned in, eager to consume the scandal firsthand. It is never easy to watch a man you respect suffer from a toxic, unstable environment. Harper continued, keeping her gaze fixed just above the crowd. But sometimes, out of the darkest storms, a true love story emerges. Trent and I have weathered a profound betrayal together. We have built a foundation based on honesty and mutual respect. She paused. She placed both hands over her stomach this time. "Today, I am overjoyed to share that our foundation is growing. Trent and I are expecting a child." A collective gasp swept through the gold room. It was followed immediately by a rush of excited murmurs and polite applause from Harper's immediate table. The narrative was perfectly engineered. Harper was painting herself as the loyal savior who rescued a brilliant CEO from a deranged wife. The unborn child legitimized their affair, transforming a corporate scandal into a celebrated modern romance. Women at the surrounding tables turned their backs to me. The physical shunning was deliberate. They were drawing their social boundaries, officially aligning their wealth and influence with Vanguard Development and its new, fertile matriarch. I felt a presence at my shoulder before I heard the footsteps. Beatrice Sterling materialized from the crowd. She wore a sharp white suit, her face flushed with triumphant adrenaline. "You heard her, Kaylin." Beatrice whispered, her voice low and tight. "You are a relic. You are a footnote. Trent is starting a real family now, a family that actually matters." I looked at Beatrice. I did not flinch. "If you possess a single ounce of dignity," Beatrice continued, "you will call Montgomery Pierce this afternoon. You will sign the divorce papers. You will release the Sedona land to Vanguard. Do not drag this through the courts and traumatize my future grandchild with your bitter jealousy. Walk away quietly, Kaylin." Beatrice turned and swept toward Harper's table, eager to embrace the mother of her new legacy. The average woman would have broken. The public humiliation, combined with the shock of an unexpected pregnancy, was designed to induce a total psychological collapse. Trent and Harper intended to break my spirit right there on the patterned carpet of the Biltmore Ballroom. I did not break. I felt a cold, pristine clarity wash over my mind. I walked over to the nearest beverage station. I picked up a fresh crystal glass and filled it with sparkling water and a slice of lime. I turned and walked directly toward table 1. The crowd parted for me, a silent sea of hostile stares anticipating a frantic, hysterical confrontation. I stopped in front of Harper. Her friends tensed, ready to call security. Harper looked up at me, her victorious smile hardening into a defensive sneer. She expected me to throw the water in her face. She expected me to scream. I extended my hand, offering her the crystal glass. "Congratulations, Harper," I said. My voice was clear, carrying a resonant, unbothered tone that echoed over the silent tables. "A child is a remarkable gift. I wish you and the father a very healthy delivery." Harper hesitated. She took the glass from my hand, her confidence faltering in the face of my terrifying composure. She searched my eyes for pain, but found only a deep, chilling amusement. I offered a polite nod to the surrounding table, turned, and walked out of the ballroom. I did not rush. I maintained a steady, measured pace, leaving the elite women of Scottsdale baffled by my grace. When I reached the valet stand, I handed the attendant my ticket. I stood in the warm Arizona sun, piecing together the timeline of Harper's miraculous announcement. The human body leaves a paper trail, just like any corporate entity. 5 years ago, during our first year of marriage, Trent insisted on a comprehensive health evaluation to secure a massive life insurance policy required by his initial investors. The underwriting process required detailed medical examinations. Trent handed me the sealed medical dossier to file in our home safe. Trent never reviewed the itemized laboratory results. He only cared that the insurance policy was approved. But I read every single page before locking them away. I read the confidential urology report from his private physician. Trent Sterling suffered from a severe, irreversible genetic condition affecting his reproductive system. His motility rate was a clinical 0. The specialist had documented the diagnosis with medical certainty. Trent was biologically sterile. He had always been sterile. Trent never disclosed this information to me because his fragile, inflated ego could not process the defect. He preferred to let his mother quietly blame my career ambitions for our lack of children. He buried the medical truth deep in a locked safe, assuming it would never see the light of day. I stepped into my sedan, the leather seats warm against my back. Harper Quinn was pregnant. She was proudly carrying a child to term. She had just announced to 400 of the wealthiest people in Arizona that Trent Sterling was the father. But the medical records I had archived 5 years ago told a different story. The baby did not belong to Trent. Harper was sleeping with another man, and she was using the pregnancy to secure her financial position within Vanguard Development. Trent, blinded by his own vanity and his desire to replace me, had accepted the child as his own without demanding a single medical test. They had built their entire public redemption narrative on a biological impossibility. I started the engine of my car. A genuine smile broke across my face. Trent thought he had frozen my land and cornered my legal defense. He thought he owned the board. But Harper had just handed me the ultimate weapon. She had introduced a ticking time bomb directly into the center of his fragile empire, and I held the detonator. I parked my sedan in front of the Biltmore Fashion Park, the heat of the Arizona sun radiating off the pavement. For 6 years, Trent had acted as the strict curator of my physical appearance. He insisted I wear muted, thrifted fabrics, framing this preference as a desire for traditional modesty. In truth, it was a calculated mechanism to render me invisible. If I looked like an unassuming frugal assistant, his custom Italian wool suits and imported silk ties would command the room by contrast. Using the debit card linked to the EcoTrust retainer, I walked into a high-end European designer boutique. The saleswoman offered me a glass of champagne, which I accepted. I bypassed the pastel dresses and soft fabrics. I selected a tailored, structured crimson power suit. The cut was sharp, the shoulders defined, and the color was unapologetic. I paired the suit with sleek, pointed leather heels that echoed with a firm authority against the polished hardwood floors. I shed the obedient archivist aesthetic in that mirrored dressing room. I walked out of the boutique dressed for a corporate execution. Elias Thorne understood that a delicate touch would not work against the vicious tactics of Montgomery Pierce in family court. He introduced me to Marcus Reed. Marcus was a former federal prosecutor who had transitioned into high-net-worth divorce litigation after dismantling organized crime syndicates. He was an imposing, broad-shouldered man who rarely spoke unless it was tactically necessary. He did not engage in the performative courtroom theatrics that defense attorneys utilize to inflate their billing hours. He dismantled his opponents through a terrifying, stony silence. Prior to our mandated mediation session, Marcus reviewed my archival findings, analyzing the forged signatures and the offshore routing numbers. He instructed me to lead the negotiation. His strategy was simple and brutal. He would sit in the room as an impenetrable wall, allowing me to hold the knife. The mediation took place in a neutral, glass-paneled boardroom in a downtown Phoenix high-rise, halfway between Vanguard Development and my new attorney's office. When Marcus and I walked through the heavy double doors, Trent and Harper were already seated at the polished oak table. Harper wore a flowing, blush-colored maternity blouse. Her left hand rested on her lower stomach in her new signature pose, ensuring everyone in the room acknowledged her pregnancy. Trent wore his customary smug grin, projecting the image of a man holding a royal flush. His attorney, Montgomery Pierce, was organizing a stack of legal briefs, displaying the bored confidence of a man expecting a swift surrender from a destitute housewife. I pulled out a leather chair and sat down directly across from Trent. I smoothed the lapel of my crimson jacket. Trent noticed the vivid color immediately. His eyes tracked the sharp lines of the suit, and a brief flicker of confusion crossed his features. He was accustomed to a woman wearing faded navy cotton who kept her eyes on the floor. He did not know how to categorize the woman sitting across from him now. Montgomery cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. My client is willing to waive the punitive damages regarding your disruptive behavior at the gala. Montgomery stated, his tone dripping with practiced condescension, provided you immediately sign over the Sedona acreage to Vanguard Development and accept a minimal spousal support buyout. We can finalize this dissolution today. It is a highly generous offer, considering your recent erratic actions and the civil injunction currently freezing your assets. Marcus Reed did not say a single word. He leaned back in his leather chair, folded his arms across his broad chest, and stared blankly at the wall behind Trent. The silence stretched. It became heavy and deeply uncomfortable. Trent smirked, assuming my silent lawyer was intimidated or simply incompetent. I opened my slim leather briefcase. I bypassed the stack of standard settlement counteroffers that usually dictate these proceedings. I pulled out a single sheet of heavy archival paper. I slid it slowly across the smooth oak table. It stopped directly in front of Trent. This is the authentic geological survey of the Sedona Aquifer, I said. My voice was calm, carrying the precise, unbushed cadence of a museum curator explaining a historical artifact. It confirms the senior water rights belong exclusively to my trust. The civil judge did not see this document. Trent scoffed, leaning back and crossing one leg over the other. We already have the civil injunction, Kaylin. The land is legally tied up. You are wasting our time with old paperwork. Montgomery Pierce let out an exasperated sigh, reaching forward to push the survey away. I reached into my briefcase a second time. I withdrew a clear plastic sleeve containing a high-resolution photocopy. I slid it squarely over the geological survey. This is the Yavapai County Land Use Permit Vanguard submitted to the Municipal Planning Commission, I continued. It features a signature that purports to be mine, but I never signed it. You forged my name, Trent, to bypass the environmental regulations and expedite your grading timeline before your loan interest rates adjusted. Montgomery stopped moving. The bored confidence drained from his face instantly. A seasoned defense attorney recognizes a fatal legal error the moment it appears on the table. Trent's face flushed a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. He opened his mouth to issue a loud denial, but I did not afford him the space to speak. I have already forwarded the authentic survey, the forged permit, and a digital timestamp analysis procured from the bribed notary to the Arizona Department of Water Resources. I informed them. I also copied the regional director of the Federal Fraud Division. Trent stared at the documents. The veins in his neck began to throb. The civil injunction you secured is worthless because it is predicated on a federal crime, I said. If you do not withdraw the divorce demands, vacate the civil freeze on my property, and walk away from the Sedona land within 24 hours, I will officially trigger the criminal investigation. Vanguard Development will be raided by the end of the week. The arrogant facade shattered. The illusion of the untouchable CEO broke into jagged pieces right there in the boardroom. Trent lost all rational control. He slammed both hands onto the oak table, knocking over a crystal water pitcher. The ice water spilled across the wood, soaking Montgomery's legal briefs. Trent lunged across the table toward me. His face was twisted in raw, unfiltered rage. "You scheming bitch," he spat, his fingers grasping the air mere inches from my crimson jacket. Marcus Reed stood up, instantly interposing his large frame between us with frightening speed. But it was Montgomery Pierce who acted with frantic desperation. Montgomery grabbed Trent by the back of his suit jacket and hauled him backward. "Sit down and shut your mouth," Montgomery barked at his own client. The lawyer realized Trent had just essentially confessed to the forgery in front of opposing counsel by reacting with explosive guilt rather than confusion. The mediation collapsed. Montgomery scrambled to gather his ruined files, his hands visibly shaking. He dragged a furious, humiliated Trent out of the glass-paneled room. Harper followed close behind them. Her face was pale. The performative maternal glow was gone. She realized the corporate wealth she had banked her future upon was evaporating right in front of her eyes. I remained seated at the table. I picked up the authentic survey, placed it back into my briefcase, and listened to the satisfying sound of the latch clicking shut. Later that afternoon, the psychological warfare shifted to a new front. Harper returned to her luxury downtown condominium alone. Trent had ordered her to take a separate car, screaming at his lawyer through his Bluetooth earpiece on the sidewalk. She unlocked her heavy mahogany door and dropped her designer handbag onto the entryway bench. She was frantic, her mind spinning with the implications of the federal fraud threat. She walked into her pristine, minimalist kitchen. Resting on the center of her marble island was a thick, unmarked manila envelope. There was no return address. There was no postage stamp. It had been hand-delivered by a private courier while she was at the mediation. The only text on the package was her name, typed in stark black ink. Harper frowned. She walked over to the island and tore open the paper seal. She reached inside and pulled out a single stapled document. It was a photocopy of a confidential urology report from a private physician dated 5 years ago. The patient name listed at the top was Trent Sterling. Harper scanned the medical jargon, her eyes skipping over the technical terms, until she reached the final diagnostic summary. The ink spelled out the truth with clinical precision. 0 motility rate, irreversible genetic defect, clinical sterility. Harper stared at the paper. The air left her lungs. She looked down at her stomach, where the child of a rival real estate developer was quietly growing. She had built her entire narrative of securing Trent's fortune on the premise of giving him the heir I never provided. The envelope slipped from her trembling fingers and hit the marble counter. The walls of her fabricated love story were collapsing, and she was trapped inside the rubble. The Arizona sun was unforgiving, baking the arid landscape with a relentless dry heat. Despite the soaring temperature, Trent Sterling had orchestrated a sprawling, catered groundbreaking ceremony for his luxury golf resort. He needed a public relations victory following the disastrous mediation session. He needed to project an image of unstoppable momentum to placate his nervous investors and secure the next round of funding. He erected pristine white canopy tents across the dusty tract of land, hiring a fleet of private valets to park the imported sports cars of his elite guests. Waiters in crisp black vests circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Hundreds of prominent figures attended the event. The guest list included powerful real estate moguls, regional bank executives, and several local politicians eager to attach their names to a high-profile economic development. From a distance, the gathering looked like the pinnacle of corporate success. It was a masterful illusion, built entirely on stolen funds and forged signatures. Trent stood on a raised wooden stage erected at the center of the site. A sleek podium equipped with a microphone was positioned near the front edge. Beside the podium rested a ceremonial shovel, its steel spade polished to a mirror finish and painted a brilliant reflective gold. Trent wore a heavy, bespoke charcoal suit, refusing to compromise his sartorial standards for the desert climate. He gripped the edges of the podium, waiting for the applause to quiet down. From my vantage point a few hundred yards away, sitting inside the tinted cabin of a black sports utility vehicle, I observed the physical toll his crumbling empire was taking on his body. He was sweating profusely. Beads of perspiration rolled down his temples and gathered at the tight collar of his dress shirt. His tailored jacket looked suffocating. He kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other, a nervous habit he only displayed when a high-stakes deal was on the verge of collapsing. He tried to project his usual charismatic authority, but the confident facade was fracturing under the intense solar glare. Harper Quinn sat in the front row of the VIP seating area. She did not look at Trent. Her face was drawn and pale, devoid of the triumphant glow she had flaunted at the philanthropy luncheon. The mysterious envelope containing Trent's medical records had clearly reached her kitchen island. She sat rigidly in her folding chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching the man she thought would secure her future with a mixture of dawning horror and trapped panic. Trent tapped the microphone, the sharp feedback echoing across the barren land. He smiled for the flashing cameras of the local press. "Thank you all for joining us on this historic afternoon," Trent announced, his voice booming over the speaker system. "Today, Vanguard Development takes the first step toward transforming this rugged terrain into the premier luxury destination of the Southwest. We are not just moving dirt today, we are building a legacy." He reached down and picked up the golden shovel, hoisting it into the air for a primary photo opportunity. The politicians seated behind him on the stage clapped enthusiastically, their identical smiles locked in place for the media. I opened the heavy door of the vehicle and stepped out into the dry heat. I wore the crimson power suit, my heels crunching against the loose gravel. Elias Thorne stepped out from the opposite side, wearing a dark navy blazer and an expression of stony indifference. We were not alone. 2 uniformed county sheriffs emerged from a secondary cruiser parked directly behind us. Their presence transformed our arrival from a private dispute into an official, state-sanctioned intervention. We walked together toward the white canopy tents. I did not rush. I maintained a measured, deliberate pace. The crowd standing near the back of the pavilion noticed the sheriffs first. The polite chatter died away, replaced by a ripple of anxious whispers. Heads turned. The same affluent guests who had laughed at me during the charity auction weeks prior now watched my approach in stunned silence. They recognized the crimson suit. They recognized the man walking beside me. The memory of the $5 million bid hovered in the air like a looming storm front. The sea of wealthy investors and socialites parted instinctively, creating a wide, clear path straight to the wooden stage. Trent stood frozen, with a golden shovel suspended in midair. The color drained from his face as he watched me ascend the short flight of stairs leading to the podium. The sheriffs remained at the base of the steps, standing with their hands resting casually near their utility belts. Elias followed me onto the stage, stopping a few feet away, projecting a calm, lethal authority. Trent lowered the shovel. His knuckles were bone white. He leaned away from the microphone, his voice dropping to a frantic, harsh whisper intended only for me. "What are you doing here, Kaylin?" Trent hissed, a bead of sweat tracing the line of his jaw. "Security will throw you off this site. You are trespassing on a corporate lease." I did not lower my voice. I spoke clearly, allowing the microphone to capture every syllable. "I am not trespassing, Trent," I replied, maintaining a chilling, unbothered professionalism. "I am enforcing the law." I reached into my briefcase and retrieved a thick official document bound by a blue legal cover. It bore the raised seal of the Arizona Supreme Court. I held the paperwork out, forcing Trent to take it in front of the flashing cameras and the silent, staring crowd. "You have just been served with a Supreme Court injunction," I stated, my voice echoing across the desert expanse. "This order mandates the immediate and indefinite cessation of all construction, grading, and development on this site. Your preliminary permits were secured through documented forgery. You do not hold the required water rights for this aquifer, and the local municipality has officially revoked your zoning clearances, pending a federal investigation." The silence that followed was total and profound. The words hung in the hot air, dismantling his public narrative with surgical precision. The political figures seated on the stage reacted with the swift, ruthless instinct of self-preservation. The mayor of Scottsdale, realizing he was currently sitting mere feet from a man accused of federal fraud, stood up abruptly. He did not say a word to Trent. He simply turned and walked quickly down the back stairs of the stage, signaling his aides to follow. The other local officials mirrored his retreat, abandoning their folding chairs and scrambling to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. Trent stared at the blue legal cover in his shaking hands. The golden shovel slipped from his grip, clattering loudly against the wooden floorboards. He looked out at the sea of investors, his mouth opening and closing, as he searched for a persuasive lie that could salvage the moment. He found nothing. Elias Thorne stepped forward. He bypassed Trent entirely and approached the microphone. He adjusted the stand, looking out over the crowd of panicked financiers and confused socialites. "Good afternoon," Elias said, his deep voice carrying a cold financial certainty. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Elias Thorne. I am the managing director of Thorne Capital Management. Several weeks ago at a Vanguard corporate gala, I made a public financial statement. Trent Sterling assumed I was a random bidder engaging in a crude joke. He was incorrect." Elias surveyed the front rows, making direct eye contact with several prominent venture capitalists. "I'm the primary debt holder of Vanguard Development," Elias announced. "My firm holds the shadow loans that have kept this corporation afloat for the past 2 years. Because the fundamental permits for this resort have been revoked due to fraudulent activity, the underlying collateral for those loans has vanished. Effective immediately, Vanguard Development is in critical default. I will be initiating asset seizure protocols by the end of the business day." A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. The polite, affluent gathering instantly dissolved into chaos. Cell phones were pulled from pockets as investors frantically dialed their brokers and legal teams. The murmurs escalated into shouts. The facade of wealth and stability shattered into dust. Trent stood at the podium, his tailored suit soaked in sweat, his empire disintegrating in real time under the harsh Arizona sun. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a hollow, terrified realization. The man who had auctioned me off for $1 now possessed a net worth of absolute zero. He had nothing left to sell. I turned away from his ruined expression. I walked down the wooden stairs, my crimson suit bright against the fading white canopies, and left him standing alone in the desert he tried to steal. The morning following the groundbreaking ceremony brought a quiet, clinical clarity to my leased Tempe apartment. The desert sun filtered through the cheap horizontal blinds, casting thin stripes of light across the Formica kitchen island. I stood near the sink with a small copper watering can, tending to a potted golden pothos I had purchased the day I moved in. I poured the tap water slowly, watching the dry soil drink the moisture. In the arid climate of Arizona, survival requires constant, deliberate nourishment. I was learning to cultivate my own environment. Resting on the counter next to the plant was my open laptop. The screen displayed the live feed of a regional financial news network running alongside the encrypted terminal connected to Vanguard Development's servers. The fallout from the severed construction project was catastrophic. While Vanguard was a privately held entity, its primary backers were public institutional investors. As the news of the Supreme Court injunction and the revoked permits hit the local wire, the panic rippled upward. I watched the digital indicators flash red. The institutional lenders were issuing immediate margin calls, pulling their bridge capital to distance themselves from the looming federal investigation. Escrow accounts were draining. Board members were exchanging frantic, panicked emails, their messages flowing directly across my screen through the administrative backdoor I still maintained. They were trapped in a burning building, scrambling to find an exit Trent had permanently locked. A sharp, erratic knock at my front door broke the quiet rhythm of the morning. I set the copper watering can down on the stainless steel sink. I did not expect Elias Thorne. Our communication was strictly digital, unless a strategic physical presence was required. I walked to the entryway and looked through the brass peephole. Beatrice Sterling stood on the concrete walkway. The formidable matriarch of Paradise Valley high society had deteriorated overnight. She wore a tailored beige Chanel suit, but the fabric looked slept in. Her usually immaculate platinum hair was slightly windblown, lacking its rigid structural spray. She gripped a leather handbag against her chest, like a shield. She looked around the modest apartment complex courtyard with undisguised distaste, shifting her weight nervously from side to side. I did not open the door immediately. I walked back to the kitchen island, picked up my smartphone, and opened the primary voice recording application. I tapped the red circle. The timer began ticking upward in silent digital increments. I placed the phone face up on the center of the wooden coffee table, ensuring the microphone faced the designated seating area. I returned to the entryway and unlocked the deadbolt. Beatrice pushed past me before I could offer a formal greeting. She stepped into the center of the beige living room, her eyes darting across the inexpensive furniture and the scuffed laminate flooring. She was breathing heavily, the scent of expensive perfume and stale coffee radiating from her clothes. "Sit down, Beatrice," I offered, gesturing toward the fabric sofa. She ignored the invitation. She spun around to face me, dropping the polite, aristocratic facade she had wielded for decades. The veneer cracked, revealing the terrified, desperate mother hiding beneath the wealth. "You have ruined everything," Kaylin Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "The board of directors is convening an emergency session right now. The regional banks have frozen Trent's operating accounts. Montgomery Pierce just billed my personal trust for a staggering retainer because Vanguard can no longer cover his legal fees." I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms. I am simply enforcing the authentic boundaries of my inherited property. Trent chose to build his empire on a foundation of sand. Do not lecture me with your pathetic historical analogies, Beatrice snapped, taking a step forward. Trent is facing federal indictments. The Department of Water Resources investigators arrived at his corporate office an hour ago. They are confiscating the hard drives. She stopped pacing and looked directly into my eyes. The venom in her gaze faltered, replaced by a sudden, pathetic vulnerability. She realized threats held no currency in this room. She shifted her tactic, transitioning from the predator back to the grieving victim. "Kaylin, please," Beatrice pleaded. Her voice dropped an octave, cracking under the strain. "He is my only son." If the federal prosecutors move forward with the wire fraud charges, he will face a decade in a federal penitentiary. They will strip his assets. They will seize my home. You have made your point. You humiliated him in front of the entire city. Now you must fix it. I remained perfectly still. How do you propose I fix a federal crime, Beatrice? She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a sleek blue checkbook. She gripped a gold fountain pen in her right hand. I will write you a personal draft right now. Beatrice offered her words, spilling out in a frantic rush. I have liquidated a portion of my private equity portfolio, $2 million, Kaylin, cash, untraceable to Vanguard. All you have to do is contact the district attorney and claim the municipality permits were a clerical misunderstanding. Tell them you gave Trent verbal authorization to sign your name on the geological survey. Release the water rights to the holding company. We can make the federal inquiry disappear if the primary victim recants the allegation. I let the silence stretch, allowing the microphone on the coffee table to capture the ambient quiet of the room before I prompted her to continue. You are asking me to commit perjury, I stated evenly. You are asking me to lie to federal investigators to cover up a felony. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, her desperation blinding her to the legal danger of her own words. It is not a felony if it stays within the family, she argued. Yes, Trent forged your signature on the Sedona permits. Yes, he diverted corporate funds into those offshore shell companies Harper manages. He made mistakes, Kaylin. He was under immense pressure to deliver the golf resort. But he did it to build a legacy. He did it for the sterling name. $2 million is a generous settlement for an empty patch of dirt. Take the money and drop the fraud allegations. The confession was flawless. She had explicitly detailed the forgery, acknowledged the embezzlement syndicate managed by Harper Quinn, and attempted to bribe a witness to a federal crime. The audio file recording on my coffee table was now a lethal piece of admissible evidence, proving the Sterling family possessed full, premeditated knowledge of the illegal activities. I looked at the blue checkbook, trembling in her hand. During the 6 years of my marriage, I had watched Beatrice write countless checks to charity galas, country club committees, and political action funds. She believed every single obstacle in life possessed a price tag. She believed my silence was just another commodity she could purchase. The water is not for sale, Beatrice, I said, and my dignity is not a line item on your balance sheet. Her jaw dropped. The gold fountain pen slipped from her fingers, clattering against the laminate floor. You are a vindictive, ungrateful woman, she whispered. I pointed toward the front door. The exit is behind you. Do not return to this property, or I will hand the security footage of this attempted bribery directly to the federal prosecutors currently raiding your son's office. Beatrice recoiled as if she had been struck. She stared at me, realizing the power dynamic had permanently inverted. She gathered her leather handbag, her shoulders slumping in defeat, and walked out of the apartment without looking back. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing her out of my life forever. I walked over to the coffee table, picked up my phone, and ended the recording. I uploaded the audio file directly to Elias Thorne with a single text message attached. We have the confession. I returned to my laptop. The encrypted terminal tracking the Vanguard corporate network began to flash with rapid, automated alerts. The board of directors had reached a unanimous consensus. Through my backdoor access, I watched the network administrator execute a devastating protocol. Trent Sterling's administrative credentials were systematically revoked. His email access was terminated. His digital building keys were deactivated. The board of directors, terrified of personal liability, had formally severed ties with their founder. They locked Trent out of his own corporate network while he was en route to the building, effectively exiling him from the empire he had built. Cornered, stripped of his title, and facing imminent arrest, Trent had only one remaining sanctuary. He retreated to the luxury downtown condominium leased under Harper Quinn's name. He assumed his pregnant mistress would offer him safe harbor, providing a united front against the collapse of his world. He was incredibly wrong. 30 minutes later, my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. The caller identification displayed Trent's personal cellular number. I tapped the green icon and answered the call, placing the device on the speaker setting. "Kaylin." Trent's voice was a ragged, frantic shout echoing with the acoustics of a high-ceilinged room. "What did you send her? What did you put in that envelope?" I leaned against the counter, listening to the chaotic background noise filtering through the transmission. I heard the sharp sound of shattering glass. "I did not send anything, Trent," I replied calmly. The truth tends to deliver itself. In the background of the call, Harper Quinn's voice cut through the audio feed, shrill and trembling with fury. "You lied to me, Trent!" She screamed, the sound of paper hitting the floor following her words. "You sat in that hospital room and let me announce a pregnancy to the entire city. You let me burn my professional reputation to the ground. The report says 0 motility. You have always been sterile." Trent scrambled to cover the receiver, his breathing ragged. "Kaylin, you have to tell her it is a fake document. You have to tell her you forged the medical records to ruin us." He was begging the archivist to lie about the archives. He wanted me to fabricate a defense to save the fabricated love story he had used to humiliate me. "You built a remarkable illusion, Trent," I said, my voice carrying the quiet, steady rhythm of falling dirt hitting a wooden coffin. "But the foundation was always hollow. Enjoy the legacy you created." I pressed the red icon, severing the connection. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the sunlight warming the golden pothos leaves. The empire had finally cracked, and the sound of it breaking was the most peaceful music I had heard in years. The legal climax of my marriage did not unfold inside a grand, sunlit courtroom. It took place on the 42nd floor of a downtown Phoenix commercial high-rise, deep within the austere architecture of Montgomery Pierce's defense firm. The deposition room was a claustrophobic, windowless box. The walls were painted a flat, institutional gray. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the central air conditioning unit and the rhythmic mechanical tapping of the court reporter's stenograph machine. I sat beside Marcus Reed at a long synthetic oak table. Opposite us sat the remnants of Trent Sterling. Trent looked haggard. The confident, untouchable titan of Southwest real estate had evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, cornered man fighting for oxygen. His bespoke suit hung loosely on his frame, hinting at a sudden and severe weight loss over the past week. Dark, bruised shadows ringed his eyes. He reached for the heavy glass water pitcher resting in the center of the table. As he lifted the handle, a distinct, uncontrollable tremor seized his fingers. The water sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the polished wood. The ice clinked sharply against the sides of his tumbler. I watched his hand shake. For 6 years, Trent had cultivated an aura of unnerving stillness. He used to sit through multi-million-dollar corporate negotiations without blinking, utilizing silence as a weapon to intimidate rival developers. Now, he could not pour a glass of tap water without betraying his internal collapse. He gripped the tumbler with both hands, avoiding my gaze. Montgomery Pierce attempted to control the narrative early. The seasoned defense attorney knew his client was facing a barrage of civil and federal threats, so he resorted to the oldest tactic in family law. He tried to paint me as a vindictive, unstable spouse, orchestrating a smear campaign to ruin a legitimate business enterprise. Montgomery paced the narrow strip of carpet behind Trent's chair, his voice projecting a practiced, theatrical indignation. Let the record reflect, Montgomery began directing his words to the court reporter that the respondent, Kaylin Miles, has engaged in a coordinated effort with rival financial entities to sabotage Vanguard Development. Is it not true, Mrs. Sterling, that your sudden alliance with Thorne Capital Management was a spiteful retaliation for a harmless joke told at a company gala? Marcus Reed did not object. He simply placed a stabilizing hand on my forearm, signaling me to let the opposing counsel exhaust his rhetoric. I looked directly at Montgomery. I did not raise my voice. I did not display a fraction of the emotional volatility he desperately wanted to provoke. A forged municipality permit is not a harmless joke, counselor, I replied calmly. It is a Class 2 felony, and I am not here to sabotage a business. I am here to reclaim stolen property. Montgomery's jaw tightened. He instructed Trent to take the oath. The court reporter administered the sworn statement binding Trent to the legal record under penalty of perjury. Marcus Reed stood up. The former federal prosecutor did not pace. He did not raise his voice. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, leaned over the synthetic oak table, and placed a single clear plastic sleeve in front of my husband. "Let us discuss Exhibit D," Marcus said, his tone flat and clinical. "This is the Yavapai County land use permit submitted by Vanguard Development to authorize preliminary grading on the Sedona Aquifer. Mr. Sterling, do you recognize this document?" Trent stared at the paper. A thin sheen of perspiration coated his forehead. He glanced at Montgomery, who offered a curt, approving nod. "Yes," Trent croaked, clearing his throat to mask the gravel in his voice. "I recognize it. It is the standard environmental clearance form." Marcus tapped a thick finger against the bottom right corner of the page. "This line requires the authorized, notarized signature of the primary deed holder. The name signed here is Kaylin Miles Sterling. Did you affix your wife's signature to this document, Mr. Sterling?" The room grew impossibly quiet. This was the definitive junction. Trent had a fleeting opportunity to invoke his constitutional right against self-incrimination. He could have pleaded ignorance or blamed a rogue administrative assistant. But Trent's fragile ego, battered by days of relentless public humiliation and financial ruin, could not tolerate another admission of weakness. He believed he could bluff his way through a sworn deposition the same way he bluffed his way through corporate board meetings. "No," Trent stated, his voice gaining a fraction of its former arrogant volume. "I did not sign that form. My wife signed it, in my presence, inside my home office, before our marital difficulties escalated." He had just committed blatant, unequivocal perjury on the official legal record. Marcus Reed did not smile, but a cold satisfaction settled into his posture. The attorney walked back to his chair and retrieved a small remote control. He aimed the device at the large flat-screen monitor mounted on the gray wall at the far end of the conference room. "We have a brief video deposition to enter into the record," Marcus announced. The screen flickered to life. A man wearing an inexpensive wrinkled dress shirt appeared via a secure video link. He sat in a sparse office, flanked by his own legal counsel. I recognized him immediately. It was Simon Foster, the private notary public Trent frequently used for expedited corporate filings. "Mr. Foster," Marcus addressed the screen. "You are currently under oath. Can you please state your involvement with Exhibit D?" Simon swallowed hard, looking down at his lap before meeting the camera lens. He was a man facing his own severe criminal charges, eager to secure a plea deal by sacrificing the architect of the fraud. "I notarized that permit," Simon confessed, his voice echoing through the sterile room. "But Mrs. Sterling was not present. Mr. Sterling brought the document into my office on a Tuesday afternoon. He handed me the permit with the signature already forged in blue ink." Trent's eyes widened in sheer panic. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "That is a lie," Trent shouted, abandoning all decorum. "He is trying to save his own skin." Marcus pressed a button on the remote. The video feed split into two screens. The left side displayed Simon Foster. The right side displayed a high-definition black and white security camera feed. The timestamp running across the bottom right corner of the footage corresponded exactly to the date the permit was filed. The silent video showed Trent walking into Simon's office suite. Trent placed the Yavapai County document on the desk. He then reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He slid the envelope across the desk. Simon opened the flap, revealing a thick stack of $100 bills. Simon then stamped the fraudulent permit with his official notary seal. The digital timestamps were irrefutable. The visual evidence of the bribe was undeniable. Trent had just lied under oath, and the prosecutor had immediately produced the exact footage proving the perjury. Montgomery Pierce dropped his silver pen. It rolled across the synthetic oak table and fell onto the carpeted floor. The seasoned defense attorney stared at the frozen security footage, his face draining of all color. A lawyer can defend a client accused of many transgressions, but an attorney cannot salvage a client who commits an explicit, documented felony in the middle of a sworn deposition. The ethical implications were disastrous. Montgomery turned to look at Trent. The attorney's expression contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated, professional disgust. He pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. "We need an immediate recess," Montgomery demanded, his voice tight and clipped. He did not wait for the court reporter to acknowledge the request. He stood up, gathered his briefcase, and walked toward the heavy wooden door without looking back at his client. Trent sat frozen in the austere, windowless box. He stared at the blank monitor, the reality of his situation closing in around him like a physical weight. He looked across the table at me. He realized the trap had not just been a spontaneous reaction to a cruel joke told at a gala. The snare had been laid with meticulous, inescapable precision. He was locked in a cage built of his own arrogance, and the archivist held the only key. The consequences of a federal perjury trap do not manifest slowly. They arrive with the swift, unforgiving force of a guillotine. Within 24 hours of Montgomery Pierce walking out of that windowless deposition room, the Securities and Exchange Commission formally intervened. Acting on the explicit evidence of embezzlement and forged land permits, federal regulators secured an emergency federal freeze on all assets tied to Vanguard Development. The corporate accounts were seized. The offshore routing numbers were flagged. The financial blood supply sustaining Trent Sterling's empire was instantly cut off. I tracked the digital execution from my kitchen island. I watched the final lines of code validate the banking restrictions. Everything Trent had stolen was now trapped behind a wall of federal red tape. The sudden drought hit Harper Quinn on a Thursday morning. She was entirely unaware of the catastrophic deposition. She still believed Trent was a master manipulator who would maneuver them out of the crisis. Maintaining her performance as the affluent, expecting matriarch, Harper booked a morning appointment at the Sanctuary Spa on Camelback Mountain. She invited 3 prominent society wives to join her for champagne and specialized prenatal massages, eager to solidify her new social standing. Elena Vance, who was seated in the adjoining lounge area, relayed the exact sequence of events to me later that afternoon. Harper approached the polished marble reception desk glowing with manufactured tranquility in a plush white robe. The receptionist presented the itemized bill for the morning, a total nearing $3,000. Harper casually handed over her sleek black Vanguard corporate credit card. She had used that specific card to fund her designer wardrobe and European vacations for 2 years. The receptionist swiped the magnetic strip. The terminal beeped a sharp, discordant note. The transaction was denied. Harper offered a tight, patronizing smile, instructing the young woman to run the magnetic strip a second time. She claimed it was a simple banking error. The receptionist complied. The terminal flashed a harsh red warning. The account was frozen by federal mandate. The 3 society wives standing behind Harper exchanged calculating glances. The whispers began immediately. Harper, stripped of her purchasing power and humiliated in front of the exact audience she sought to impress, was forced to leave the spa empty-handed. The financial illusion had evaporated. Harper realized the offshore shell companies were useless. The wealth she was promised was gone. I arrived at the Vanguard corporate headquarters an hour after the spa incident. The interim board of directors, desperate to mitigate the collateral damage of Trent's impending federal indictment, had requested a formal sit-down. Elias Thorne had arranged the meeting, aiming to negotiate a clean transfer of the distressed debt and my senior water rights. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the lobby, wearing a charcoal trench coat over a simple white blouse. The atmosphere inside the slate-tiled atrium was tense. 2 armed corporate security guards stood near the primary elevator bank. Trent Sterling was standing a few feet away from them, his face flushed a dangerous mottled red. The board had deactivated his access badges the previous day. Trent, unable to process the reality of his exile, had returned to the building, demanding entry to his corner office. He was arguing with the head of security, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He looked disheveled. His tie was loosened, and his designer suit jacket was draped haphazardly over his arm. He was no longer the untouchable titan of real estate. He was a trespasser in the house he built. Before the guards could physically restrain him, the revolving glass doors spun rapidly behind me. Harper marched into the lobby. She had not bothered to change out of her athletic wear. Her face was pale, devoid of the smug, victorious aura she had paraded around the Biltmore ballroom. She bypassed me entirely, her eyes locked onto Trent with a predatory fury. She marched straight up to the security desk. "You lied to me," Harper shouted, her voice shrill and unmeasured. The acoustics of the cavernous lobby amplified her rage. "My cards are dead. The bank just called my cell phone to inform me the downtown condominium is facing immediate foreclosure due to tied federal assets. You told me the mediation was a minor setback. You told me you had the capital protected." Trent flinched, glancing nervously at the security guards and the few employees watching from the mezzanine. He reached out, attempting to grasp her elbow to usher her toward the exit. "Keep your voice down," Harper Trent hissed, his eyes darting across the room. "The board is acting irrationally. It is a temporary compliance freeze. I have external investors lining up. We just need to maintain a unified front." Harper jerked her arm away from his grasp as if his skin burned. "A unified front?" she repeated, a bitter, hysterical laugh escaping her throat. "There is no front left to maintain. You have zero liquidity. You perjured yourself on camera. My lawyer called me 20 minutes ago to advise me to seek a federal plea deal to avoid prison time for the dummy corporations." Trent stepped closer to her, his posture radiating a frantic, desperate need for control. He realized he was losing his final ally. He attempted to pull the only emotional lever he believed he still possessed. "Think about our family," Trent pleaded, his tone dropping into a pathetic, manufactured sincerity. "Think about our future. Think about our child. I will fix this. I am doing all of this for the baby." The lobby fell dead silent. The security guards watched the exchange shifting uncomfortably. I stood near a slate pillar, observing the final, lethal detonation of their toxic alliance. Harper stared at him. The rage in her eyes shifted into something far more destructive. It was pure, unadulterated contempt. She let out a short, sharp laugh that held no trace of humor. It was a cold sound ringing out across the polished concrete floor. "You are doing this for the baby," Harper mocked, her voice laced with venom. "You arrogant fool. Do you honestly believe I would tether myself to a man who is clinically sterile?" Trent's jaw went slack. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, gray shell. He took a stumbling half-step backward, his mind struggling to process the public revelation of his deepest, most guarded defect. "I read the urology report someone left on my kitchen island." Harper continued, ensuring her words carried to every corner of the atrium. "Zero motility. You cannot father a child. You have never been able to father a child." Trent opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. His breathing turned shallow and erratic. "But whose?" he managed to choke out, his voice cracking. Harper smiled. It was a cruel, punishing expression. "The child belongs to David Vance. He is a senior partner at Sunbelt Development, a man who actually owns his land and possesses actual liquidity. I needed a secure anchor when your commercial build started defaulting, Trent. I chose a winning horse. You were just a convenient stepping stone." The betrayal struck Trent with physical force. His knees buckled slightly. The psychological structure he had built to replace me, the narrative of the fertile, loyal mistress, and the new family legacy, crumbled into dust. He had abandoned his marriage, embezzled millions, and committed federal fraud to build an empire for a child that belonged to his direct corporate rival. Harper did not linger to watch him suffocate in his own ruin. She turned on her heel and marched back through the revolving doors, abandoning him to the federal authorities. Trent stood alone in the center of the vast lobby. He looked small. The head of security, a tall man with a stern expression, stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Trent's shoulder. Mr. Sterling, the guard, stated, his tone devoid of any former respect. "The interim board has instructed us to remove you from the premises immediately. Please walk toward the exit or we will physically escort you." Trent did not argue. He did not issue any threats. He dropped his gaze to the polished floor, his shoulders slumping in total, irrevocable defeat. The titan of Southwest real estate shuffled slowly toward the glass doors, guided by the very security personnel he used to employ. I stepped out from behind the slate pillar and walked toward the primary elevator bank. I pressed the call button, listening to the soft electronic chime. The doors slid open, inviting me upward to the executive boardroom, where Elias Thorne was waiting. I stepped inside the cab, leaving the hollow shell of my former husband on the sidewalk, entirely stripped of the power he once used to torment me. The elevator doors parted. I stepped onto the 42nd floor of the Vanguard Development Tower. The frantic, high-stakes energy that usually defined the executive wing had vanished. The corridors were silent. The assistants and junior analysts had cleared out early, fearing the looming federal subpoenas and the inevitable corporate raids. I walked past the empty reception desk, my heels clicking a steady, authoritative rhythm against the polished concrete floor. I did not stop at the guest waiting area. I walked directly into the primary glass-walled conference room. 7 men and 1 woman sat around the sprawling mahogany table. They were the Vanguard Board of Directors. These were individuals who possessed generational wealth and guarded it with ruthless paranoia. For 6 years, they had tolerated Trent's oversized ego and reckless expansion tactics because the quarterly dividends arrived on schedule. Today, the dividend checks were frozen. The federal authorities were reviewing their personal liability. They looked at me not with the condescension they once reserved for a quiet archivist, but with raw, unfiltered dread. I did not wait for an invitation to sit. I bypassed the standard guest chairs lined along the far wall. I walked straight to the head of the table. I pulled out the high-backed black leather executive chair. It was the exact seat Trent had occupied during our disastrous mediation just weeks prior. I sat down, resting my hands flat against the cool, smooth armrests. The chair offered a solid, grounded feeling of control. I claimed the throne of the empire I was about to dismantle. Elias Thorne sat to my right. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, projecting a calm, lethal authority. He did not bring a sprawling legal team to clutter the room. He brought a single, slim, leather portfolio. The chairman of the board, an older venture capitalist named Harrison Caldwell, cleared his throat. Harrison was a man who prized optics over ethics. I knew his financial background intimately. I had organized his initial investment profile when Vanguard was just a rented office above a dry cleaner. Harrison hated public scandal. Trent had brought a federal scandal directly to his doorstep. "We are in an untenable position," Kalen Harrison began, his voice tight and strained. "The regional banks have locked our operating accounts. The city planners will not return our phone calls. The golf resort project is dead in the dirt, and the construction crews are demanding payment or threatening liens. We understand you hold the authentic geological surveys for the Sedona Aquifer. We are prepared to offer a reasonable settlement for those rights to satisfy the federal regulators and unfreeze our secondary assets." Harrison slid a piece of paper across the mahogany table. It was a formal buyout offer. I did not look at the numbers. I pushed the paper back toward him. "I am not here to negotiate a minor real estate transaction, Harrison," I said, keeping my tone even and measured. "I am here to dictate the terms of your survival." A murmur of indignation rippled through the board members. A younger executive near the end of the table scoffed, preparing to issue a standard corporate threat. Elias Thorne did not allow the man to speak. Elias opened his leather portfolio and extracted a certified banking ledger. "Before you issue a threat, you should understand your current ledger," Elias announced. The room quieted instantly. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Thorne Capital Management finalized the acquisition of all outstanding distressed debt tied to Vanguard Development. We purchased the notes from your shadow lenders. We are your sole primary creditor. You owe my trust $50 million, and the note is currently in critical default. I have the legal authority to force Vanguard into immediate liquidation today." The color drained from Harrison's face. The board members realized they were boxed in. They had assumed they were engaging in a domestic dispute over a piece of inherited property. They now understood they were facing a hostile corporate takeover orchestrated by the woman they had ignored for half a decade. I will release the Sedona water rights to Vanguard. I continued reclaiming the floor. The price is a fair market valuation of $20 million paid directly into my private trust. But the capital transfer is only the first condition. I leaned forward, locking eyes with Harrison. The core operations of this firm will shift. The era of building artificial water-wasting luxury resorts in the desert is over. Vanguard will pivot its primary focus to sustainable ecological development. You will dedicate your engineering resources to clean energy infrastructure and high-density urban housing. If you deviate from this mandate, Thorn Capital will call the debt and liquidate your assets without hesitation. Harrison swallowed hard. We are a luxury development firm, Kaylin. A pivot of that magnitude requires a total rebranding. It requires a new executive vision. Which brings me to my final condition I stated. Trent Sterling is permanently excised from this corporation. He forfeits his founder shares, his executive pension is dissolved, his title is erased from every piece of corporate literature. You will offer him 0 severance. He signs away his entire stake right now, or I trigger the default protocol and you all lose your equity. The boardroom fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The directors weighed their options. Loyalty to Trent was a liability they could no longer afford. He had forged documents. He had embezzled investor funds. He had dragged their reputations through the mud. Sacrificing the founder to save their own wealth was an easy calculation. Harrison did not ask for a private recess. He looked around the table. All in favor of accepting the terms presented by Thorn Capital and Kaylin Sterling, he asked. 8 hands went up. The vote was unanimous. The empire severed its ties with its creator in less than 30 seconds. "Bring him in," Harrison instructed the corporate secretary standing near the door. 2 minutes later, Trent Sterling walked into the glass-walled conference room. He was flanked by a junior attorney provided by the firm since Montgomery Pierce had formally dropped him as a client. Trent looked hollow. The arrogance that once radiated from his posture had been replaced by a crushing physical exhaustion. He wore a wrinkled suit. His eyes darted around the room, searching for a sympathetic face among the board members. He found none. They stared at him with cold, calculating detachment. Trent's gaze finally landed on me. I was sitting in his chair at the head of his table, dictating the fate of his company. A muscle jumped in his jaw. The realization of his absolute defeat settled over him like a heavy shroud. Harrison slid a thick stack of legal documents down the length of the mahogany table. It was a comprehensive separation agreement. "Sign the papers," Trent Harrison ordered. The tone was devoid of any former camaraderie. "You surrender your equity, your pension, and your voting rights. In exchange, the board will decline to file a civil suit against you for the embezzlement. You will still have to answer to the federal authorities, but Vanguard will no longer pursue you for the stolen capital. It is the only lifeline you have left." Trent stared at the separation agreement. It was the same tactic he had tried to use against me weeks prior with the forged postnuptial contract. He had tried to force me into poverty with the stroke of a pen. Now the pen was waiting for him. He looked down at the silver pen resting on the polished wood. His hand shook as he reached for it. He hesitated, hovering the metal tip over the signature line. He had spent his entire adult life building this firm. He had sacrificed his integrity, abandoned his marriage, and orchestrated an elaborate fraud to protect the Vanguard name. Signing the document meant erasing himself from the legacy he craved. "We do not have all day." Trent Elias Thorne prompted, checking his watch with casual indifference. Trent swallowed hard. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name. He flipped to the next page and signed again. He repeated the process until every line was filled, officially surrendering his empire to the woman he had auctioned off for $1. He dropped the pen. It clattered against the table. He stood up slowly, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man waking up from a long, feverish nightmare, only to realize the nightmare was his actual life. He turned toward me. The junior attorney tried to guide him toward the exit, but Trent resisted. He took a step closer to the head of the table. He wanted closure. He wanted to deliver a final dramatic monologue. He wanted to see a spark of vindication or pity in my eyes, something to validate his lingering sense of self-importance. Kalen Trent rasped, his voice cracking. I never meant for it to go this far. If you had just supported the vision, we could have built something incredible together. I did not let him finish. I did not blink. I did not offer him a parting insult or a triumphant smirk. I shifted my gaze, looking past his shoulder, at the skyline of downtown Phoenix, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I focused on the distant mountains, studying the rugged peaks and the clear blue sky. I looked right through him. He was no longer a threat. He was no longer a husband. He was an irrelevancy, a faded ghost standing in a room he no longer owned. The archivist had officially closed his file. Trent stood there for 5 agonizing seconds, waiting for a reaction that would never come. The silence stripped away his final shred of dignity. Defeated, erased, and entirely invisible, he turned and walked out of the boardroom. 6 months passed the way true healing always does. The transition does not happen with a sudden theatrical revelation. It happens through steady, unremarkable increments until you look in the mirror and realize the heavy weight you carried for years is gone. I drove north on Interstate 17, leaving the dense, sprawling grid of Phoenix behind me. I was not sitting in the passenger seat of a suffocating European sports car trapped in the chilling silence of my former marriage. I was behind the steering wheel of a new hybrid utility vehicle I purchased in cash. The car was modest, reliable, and entirely mine. I rolled the driver's side window down, allowing the warm Arizona wind to fill the cabin. The arid air smelled of sun-baked sagebrush and ancient juniper. It smelled like freedom. The shifting landscape mirrored the profound changes in my own reality. As the elevation climbed toward the high desert, the towering saguaro cacti gave way to dense pine forests and striking red rock formations. Behind me, in the sterile courtrooms of Maricopa County, the remnants of Trent Sterling were facing the unforgiving machinery of the federal justice system. Federal prosecutors do not operate on the frantic timeline of a corporate news cycle. They build their cases with lethal patience. 2 months after he signed away his company, the United States Attorney unsealed a 40-page indictment. Trent was formally charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and perjury. He was arrested at a mid-range chain hotel near the airport, a far cry from his Paradise Valley estate. His assets remained frozen by the Securities and Exchange Commission, forcing him to rely on an overworked public defender. The titan of Southwest real estate was reduced to an inmate number, waiting for a trial date he could not afford to delay. Harper Quinn experienced a different kind of ruin. When David Vance confirmed his paternity through a mandatory genetic test, he acted with the swift, unfeeling precision of a seasoned corporate raider. He secured full primary custody of the child before it was even born, leveraging Harper's involvement in Trent's shell companies to force her signature on an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Stripped of her leverage, locked out of her downtown condominium, and shunned by the elite circle she had sacrificed her integrity to join, Harper packed her remaining designer clothes into a rented moving truck. She fled the state of Arizona under the cover of darkness. She currently resides in a small, forgotten town in central Nevada, her social standing permanently decimated. The women at the country club deleted her contact information the very same afternoon the federal indictment hit the local wire. Even Beatrice Sterling retreated into the shadows. The matriarch who once dictated the social calendar of Paradise Valley now lives in strict isolation. Her friends stopped returning her phone calls. Her philanthropic board memberships were quietly allowed to expire. She sits alone in her pristine mansion surrounded by expensive furniture and silence, paying the steep price for defending a legacy built on a stolen foundation. The empire she tried to protect with a $2 million bribe had collapsed, taking her cherished status down with it. I turned off the main highway, navigating the familiar winding 2-lane road that led toward the Sedona city limits. The red dirt crunched under the thick tires of my vehicle. I pulled onto the 40-acre plot of land my grandfather left me. I shifted the vehicle into park and stepped out into the bright, clear morning. The land looked exactly as it had when I was a child. The deep trenches Trent's bulldozers had carved into the earth were filled and leveled. The native scrub grass was already beginning to reclaim the disturbed soil. I walked toward the center of the parcel. This arid expanse was the catalyst for a war I never wanted to fight, but it was also the exact terrain that saved me. I closed my eyes, recalling the rough texture of my grandfather's callous hands and the simple wisdom he shared on a wooden porch decades ago. He taught me that water was the only true currency in the desert. He taught me to protect the well. I opened my eyes and looked at the architectural blueprints resting on a folding table nearby. I was breaking ground today, but not for a toxic, water-wasting golf resort designed to stroke the ego of a desperate man. The $20 million settlement I extracted from the Vanguard Board of Directors was sitting securely in a protected trust. I used that capital to fund a radically different vision. We were building a state-of-the-art ecological sanctuary. The facility would serve as an advanced research center for arid land water conservation and a protected refuge for native desert flora. The plans included advanced solar arrays, sustainable water retention basins, and community agriculture plots. It was a project rooted in preservation, designed to outlast any corporate vanity project. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew my attention toward the dirt access road. A dark, unassuming truck pulled up alongside my utility vehicle. Elias Thorne stepped out, wearing denim jeans and a simple cotton shirt. He did not look like a ruthless venture capitalist or a corporate raider. He looked like a man who understood the intrinsic value of the ground beneath his feet. He walked toward me, his boots kicking up small clouds of red dust. Elias did not arrive to assert dominance or claim credit for the victory. He attended the groundbreaking ceremony as an equal partner. The eco-trust he managed had secured a long-term, mutually beneficial lease on a designated portion of the sanctuary to conduct their environmental research. We stood side by side looking out over the vast red landscape. There was no performative grandstanding. There was only the quiet, profound strength of a partnership built on mutual respect, shared vision, and undeniable trust. We shook hands, sealing an alliance that had systematically dismantled a fraudulent syndicate and restored the integrity of the aquifer beneath us. I stood tall in the desert sun. For years, I had allowed a cruel man to dictate my worth. I had allowed myself to be folded into the background, organizing his files, curating his schedule, and wearing muted colors to ensure he remained the center of attention. I allowed him to place a $1 price tag on my head in front of 400 people. But dignity is not a commodity that can be auctioned off or frozen in a bank account. It is an inherent, unyielding force. The archivist had stepped out of the basement and taken control of the narrative. I want to ask you a question. Have you ever sat in a room and allowed someone to calculate your worth? Have you ever been underestimated by a partner, a boss, or a family member who mistook your quiet endurance for weakness? Sometimes the people who try to make you feel small are doing so because they are terrified of the immense power you actually hold. They want you to believe you are dependent on their resources, their approval, or their status. Do not let them forge your signature on the story of your own life. Your value is not determined by the people who fail to see it. It is determined by the boundaries you refuse to lower and the quiet strength you build in the shadows. When the time comes, do not scream. Do not beg for a seat at a table that does not respect you. Build your own table. Let your actions speak with the undeniable volume of a closing vault door. If you have ever had to walk away from a situation designed to break you, I want to hear your story. Scroll down to the comments right now and tell me about the exact moment you decided to take your power back. Share the moment you stopped accepting the price tag they placed on you. Let us build a record of resilience together. Remember to subscribe so you never miss a story of quiet strength finding its voice. You are worth more than they could ever afford to pay. Keep moving forward.